Sometimes if you really take something on bold, the new actions, it's going to be effortful. The visioning is the fun part for many of us. Some people are pained by that, but for many of us, the vision's the fun part. But the taking the action over time to bring that vision into reality, that can be grueling.
Yes.
It's tough, man. So we have to keep that vision alive.
Welcome to Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations, with your host, executive leadership coach and CEO of the Granger Network, Kari Granger, and me, Paul Adams, CEO of Sound Financial Group. This episode completes our series on new futures, how to keep your vision alive.
And today we're going to talk about sustaining vision.
I have just another unique example from my background around that big merger that came together. CEO that's leading this large charge. He had created an incredible vision. And one thing that would happen was very different. I think it happens elsewhere. I've just never been so close to as I was in this case. Is this guy is probably still to this day as a mentor, probably one of the best visionaries that I've ever seen. Like somebody who, when you're in his presence, it's nearly a distortion field of future. Like he's going to sit with you, talk about the future. He would have a conversation with my wife and I about tandem bike riding through Germany with his wife and what the experience was everything else. My wife and I had never ridden separate bikes together at the same time, let alone a tandem bike through the countryside of a European country. And I tell you, we were looking at tandem bikes after. That's how amazing and inspiring this guy was. In any case, what would happen though is that he would periodically and often create enormous visions of the future. And people would go to work on it because of his ability to inspire action. And as they worked on it and worked to create that future, things would go wrong. It could be anything from the support not quite existing in the enterprise, or because the marketplace shifted and that strategy didn't work anymore. Whatever it was, there was never a time where he paused long enough to say why what didn't work. It almost ties a touch, I think, to our last episode. But the idea that there's just another great new future, we're going to do this. And when it would come up, he would just simply almost dismiss it by saying, well, yeah, but if I don't swing for the fences, we'll never hit home runs. So periodically I'm going to miss. But there was no looking back. And so he would create a vision and create a vision and create a vision. And he could sustain new visions, didn't bother him. What would happen though, and what I've watched over the years, very few key executives have journeyed with him for more than 10 years, that they get fatigued at the new vision after new vision after new vision, instead of a chance to execute and win. And it becomes more difficult. So the other thing that happens is in a large organization like that, lots of people that are buying into his vision turn over in the organization, because the new vision sounds very inspiring, but it sounds a lot less inspiring if there were 4 visions prior to that never fully bore fruit.
That reminds me about me on Groupon.
I cannot wait to hear this. Of all the examples I thought were going to happen next, that is not one I would have put in the list.
Oh, I could get this knife set. It's so much better than the other knife set. Oh, these sheets, like I had the good sheets, like the Turkish sheets, and then there's like the bamboo Turkish sheets. I mean, it's just like perpetual new visions of my future.
Yes. Which works for a while. Until
you run out of closet space for all your sheets.
It is tough to get your sheet together sometimes.
He's a serial vision maker.
Inspiring and authentic and engaging, tiring.
Yeah, 100%. He's a possibility machine.
Yes.
Yeah. That's like his thing. He just pumps out possibility. He sees new possibility. Yeah, I get that. In fact, the work that we do, I don't enjoy actually the implementation, execution, and sustainment as much as I enjoy that initial process of creating, completing, and then creating the new future. That has energy, it's invigorating. And, to help my addiction to being a perpetual visioner, I'm kind of like that guy, right? That I brought in a team that are expert implementers. Yeah, there's a few things to say about how do you implement and execute a vision. And, there's a lot of things you can learn. And I know you can Google this, and there's, I don't know, probably 50,000 articles on this. But I'll just mention 4 things that I found that if I put these 4 things in place, it tends to work pretty well for us and those we serve. The first thing, and actually John Kotter said this in his book about change, I don't know how long ago, probably 15 years ago or something. He's the change expert. But the thing that I've really taken from him is that leaders under communicate vision by a factor of 100.
Under communicate the vision.
By a factor of 100.
Wow.
The vision, not new visions, not like let me communicate 100 new visions, but the vision by a factor of about 100. So, and I see this a lot. We create the new future and then we just kind of assume, we've said it once and we assume people have that. So that's one thing is, yes, there's the initial vision. And then they're saying it again, and then they're saying it again. So one of the things we do on our team calls, just within the Granger Network, is we read our vision at the beginning of every alignment call, our monthly alignment call. So that at least once a month, we're actually looking at, oh yeah, this is the vision we created. How are we lining ourselves up to this vision? And then, when we're talking about people who'd like to work with us, we're speaking vision. When we're looking at how we're doing performance reviews, we're looking back at our vision and saying, how are we, doing our... So we're really looking in our communication about vision. We're also looking at what are all the places that vision could express itself. And let's make sure we're lined up in that way. The other thing is in communication is communicating updates. So there's one, he's actually colonel in the Air Force, and I've worked with him a couple times. And the thing he's so good about is communicating to those he's leading. And he leads, I don't know, around 1,000 or so airmen. He communicates, here's what we've done. Here's what we haven't done. And it's consistent. So that communication, here's our vision. Here's what we said we were going to do. It's consistent communication. And then the second piece that kind of ties into that is an accountability structure. So some kind of structure for accountability. And that's the thing I kind of wonder about a little bit with your example, right? Was there any structure put in place to be accountable to that vision and the strategy that you guys set up?
No. In fact, one thing that he would talk about that was tough for him is the second there was a real structure, there was accountability. And the second there was accountability, there's a chance for somebody to check your work. So even though this guy could stand in front of a conference of 1,000 people, inspire action, people are excited, everything else, he would look at even every PowerPoint of every talk he gave as it's not quite finished yet. What I need to do is still modify a couple things, because it would open him up to having the chance for someone to be critical of what it was he was doing. I don't know if that was at the core of it or not, but that was a manifestation, is nothing was ever quite done. And as a result, a lot of the team that's there are all people that are okay with everything being not quite done. So when a meeting, when it would say, okay, so what are we going to do? And where's the accountability going to be on these 3 strategies you just discussed? Or the new 3 strategies would be vision cast in a leadership team meeting. And everybody would say, what about the 3 strategies we talked about last quarter? And it really took some of us it was a friction to be able to go back and say, no, we need a weekly meeting with you where we're doing updates on what's going on here, because we feel like you're going to lose it. Not lose it in a bad way. You're going to create something else wonderful and new, but we're going to bust our humps to try to get the last thing done. And it became very tiring. And you're exactly right. There just was no accountability in it.
And, that's also unfulfilling for the people he was leading, because you never get to see the completion of your work.
Yes.
Right. So they say the devil's in the details. And sometimes we don't like to look at the devil when we're visioners.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's just such a great feeling to like create and create and create. And there's a certain avoidance of responsibility that I hear, right? Like not really being responsible for what it takes to bring something into fruition. And even if that's not your gig, to allow for the space and the resources for somebody who it is that gig to complete, to be acknowledged for their completion of it, to celebrate the work that they're doing, right? So just like we've been speaking about in the last episode and then the debrief episode, which if you missed that, I mean, debrief episode.
First debrief episode ever in the podcasting world.
I'm going to be heartbroken if somebody says, not really, you guys, it's been done over here.
I challenge them.
Okay.
Please send that in. Send us an email at the Granger Network.
There, like we've been speaking about, the completion is so important. And true completion does allow for the next creation. So he's robbing himself a little bit. But that accountability structure allows for completion. And we're going to do a whole series in the future on accountability. I'm certain we will, Paul. And putting in a structure in which people can say, hey, this is what we said we're going to do. And here's when we said we're going to do it. And then to allow ourselves to say, it happened, it didn't happen. To put in to say, when are we going to talk about this vision? So we're going to create this new vision. Then we're going to say, here are the strategies we're after. Here's the milestones we're after. You have to have a way to come back and to account for that consistently, reliably over time. And then the third thing is stakeholder involvement. So there's a lot, when we talked about in our first or second, I don't remember, episode in this series, we talked about addressing the fundamental cares of all the stakeholders. So you create a new future and you got different stakeholders. You have some that are required to align. You have some that are required to act. And, you really created this, if you did it well, in a way that addressed their fundamental cares. So having the stakeholders involved at the right level, if they're the ones that need to align to say, hey, guess what? Here's what we're doing. Here's how far we are, just to keep them engaged and supporting.
Yes.
And then the last one that I want to talk about that, if we put this in place, it's important is, just to say one thing about the last one, the stakeholder involvement. Sometimes when I work in military units, in the military, there's always a boss, right? It just keeps going up and up and up and up and up, right? I mean, eventually it stops, but then, it's, you get to the president of the United States and their boss is really the American people, right? So, but there's always a boss. So it's really important to include the boss, right? So sometimes I'll work with a unit and they'll get really excited about the future and they'll forget to include that key stakeholder, their commander. And halfway through the year, their commander says, oh, we're going to do this thing over here, which is totally in conflict with what they created, right? So to include the key stakeholders so that they know they're bought into, they're excited about and supporting the direction you're going.
I have had that happen in companies where I've been the leader and I've been in charge of a large team. And then I come in and say, we're going to do this. Well, we've been doing this other thing for 6 months, fully implementing. I'm like, well, that's stopping.
You didn't include me.
You didn't include me. And by the way, maybe I should have, or I shouldn't have, but they didn't even try to do the vision. It was like almost the way I got, and this is something I'd have everybody consider who's listening, is that if you've got that boss and you're in a strategy, sometimes when the boss comes in, they didn't know you were in a strategy. I've watched it way too many times, seen me do it to the CEO I've worked for, and being able to say, being moral about, well, no, you don't understand. We've been doing this. Like, knock it off, get off my back. I'm righteously indignant about your strategy because I've been working so hard on this and you didn't care to ask. That is just about going to get zero results or less.
Right. You didn't address and take care of their fundamental care over time and let them be part of it. Sometimes we do it under the radar because we don't want to hear a no. Yeah.
And then we're not enrolling. When they do peek in at us, we're not doing anything to have them be able to catch the vision of what we've been working on the last 6 months. It's like shaking our fist at them like you don't understand.
Yeah. And if you're finding yourself in the case where you're doing it under the radar because you don't want to get a no, then go back and listen to the episode where we talk about, the 4 components to creating a compelling vision.
Mhm.
And just review that, because that may help you create a vision that they care about. Okay, so then also 4, to sustaining, right? So we talked about communication, we talked about accountability, we talked about stakeholder involvement. So then the 4th one is maintaining context. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's easy to lose sight of the vision, and then it just becomes action. And then action I have to do. And then action people are following up with me about. And action that, if you lose sight of the vision, the context for why you're taking that action, then the actions can turn into burdens over time. So it's really important. It kind of goes with communicating the vision, but, sometimes if you really take something on bold, the new actions, it's going to be effortful. The visioning is the fun part for many of us. Some people are pained by that, but for many of us, the vision's the fun part. But the taking the action over time to bring that vision into reality, that can be grueling.
Yes.
It's tough, man. So we have to keep that vision alive. Even doing this podcast for me and for, my colleague, Lindsay, we mention her every once in a while. I think about the grueling tasks. It would be for me. I don't know if it is for her, that she's got to do day in, day out to make it happen. And she's the one, and she's also the one that's so good at maintaining this really empowering vision of what this podcast is making available for people. So when that vision is strong,
yes,
it's easy to take those tasks. But if that vision isn't there, the tasks start to become meaningless. So if you go way back to episode 1, I love this episode because there's like all these things kind of coming together. But if you go way back to the first episode in our first series, we talked about people's actions are consistent with the way that they observe their situations, themselves, and their future. Right? So if, like in this podcast, if Lindsay maintains that empowering vision of like, wow, we're making a whole different kind of leadership available for people. And that's the way she's observing, taking the tasks of, getting you and I scheduled, like everything that she's, right? She's, how are we going to plan these out? It's easy. But when we lose sight of the context, then the actions are difficult. I was just working with, I think I talked about this in a previous episode, but I'm working with a military unit that had active duty and guard that were kind of like thrown in together. And, it's been really tough for them over the last, 10, 12 years because they have different mission sets and they have different cultures and they have different ways of doing things and they have even kind of different primary values, yet they have to share all the resources. They have to share the aircraft.
I have to interrupt you. This is key. And I don't want people who maybe were just looking out the window of their car for a moment when you said that. These 2 units, so think of it post-merger type thing, people that carry around guns have been in a disagreement for over a decade. Like, the thing like time will heal all wounds? Physical, maybe.
Or they may reify wounds.
yeah. It's and now that the conflict has been going on this long, it has its own momentum. I just want people to skip over that we're talking about a decade-long set of disagreements you stepped into.
Yeah, decade long. And that's probably conservative estimate. Yeah. And what they created, consistent with the methodology we spoke about on the last 2 episodes, they created a whole new era of partnership together. Now, could you imagine after creating that whole new era of partnership, what would it be like the next week when they went back to their work centers? They've literally constructed walls in their work centers so they didn't have to be in the same room together and they could have their own territory. And they're going to go back into the same work centers. So it is not easy the very next day that we step out of that offsite to go into their world. And they have really got to maintain this new vision of a whole new partnership because it's hard to break down those walls and it's hard to go into those meetings where you have different fundamental cares. different ways of doing things, and sit in that meeting for 2 hours longer than you would have in the past when you just smile, nod, and leave and do your own thing anyway. But to sit for 2 hours longer and actually hash it out for the sake of partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So that last one, that we have to maintain the context of our vision, is really important so that our actions are, have meaning over time.
I could not agree more. So those four key things, I'm going to get them out of order. Would you get me in order on them, Kari, so we can leave everybody with these 4 items? You're creating a vision. You want to sustain it. What are the 4 areas they need to think about?
Communicating.
Under-communicate by 100 times. So you need to over-communicate.
By 100 times. Putting in place a structure for accountability so you can complete the actions that you see you need to take. Maintaining, ensuring, engaging your stakeholders to sustain their involvement over time and addressing their concerns, their fundamental cares, and maintaining the context of your vision while you take action.
Because after that initial vision's cast, you got to hold it in place long enough. Kari, I think people should be able to walk away from this episode walking into their week, and maybe here could be your fun game for the week to take away from this episode is look around your existing organization and what visions have been cast by you or by others that haven't been sustained. And maybe some of them need to be completed and let go, and some of them need to be resurrected. And then put it in a place with these 4 principles to make sure that you can sustain it going forward.
Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome. And to all of our listeners, we hope this has been a contribution to your leadership impact. Thank you for tuning into Leadership Impact, the podcast for modern executives who are reinventing leadership within their organizations. Subscribe now at grangerNetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And to support you in your leadership impact, we've created an exclusive set of guiding questions on today's topic. Just text the word future to 900-900 and you'll receive the link. If you like what you're hearing, you will love our online courses, which will transform your performance and leadership over 4 months with videos, practices, and group Q&As. These online courses are our approach to essential development for professionals. Learn more at GrangerNetwork.com and join us for our next episode on Coordinating with Precision.